Welcome to Authors on the Air. I'm host Penny Manson. My guest today is Mike Gayle, visiting with us from Birmingham in the UK. Hello, Mike. Thanks for joining us today.
Hello, thank you so much for having me on. I'm really excited to be here. Thank you.
Well, I am just thrilled, and the timing couldn't have been better. Above and beyond wanting to talk about your fabulous book, All the Lonely People, I just have to ask, how much of the Queen stuff did you actually sit through in the last week?
My wife actually is a real royalist, and she loves all of that. And um, but it's been a strange it's been a strange sort of week because we were out at dinner when we heard the news, and there was a sort of strange sort of tone to it all because it felt like the media knew before everybody else, and so when they said that she wasn't very well and that the family were going up to everybody, the media here in the UK straight away were. It was almost like they were there in preparation. And then we'd gone for this meal, and then we'd kind of come out, and then we heard this news, and it was a real shock actually because she was an institution, and of course in that initial, this is a once in a lifetime thing, and so you were watching the news, but then it's just carried on and on and on and on, and I have to say I did sort of lose interest in it a little bit just because um it was a lot of people repeating themselves and a lot of people who didn't actually know anything, just talking about just chatting, and so in the end I kind of lost a little bit of interest, but I did see kind of Charles being sworn in or whatever they call it, and so that kind of felt like a momentous occasion, and I did see little bits of the actual kind of the ceremony on Saturday, but other than that, the stuff in between, I kind of let them get on with it.
Yeah, the queen is dead. Long live the king. What more is there to say?
Exactly. Yes. Yes. But they found it. They found lots to say. I'm not quite sure how much of it was relevant.
A full week's worth. It's amazing. Okay, so let's talk about your book, All the
Thank you.
Lonely People. All right. You tell us a little bit about it. What would you like somebody who is just hearing about the book for the first time right now? What would you want them to know about this book?
All the Lonely People is a really hopeful and uplifting book. It's a book about that follows. It's a book about a character called Hubert Bird, and it's structured in a kind of then and now. So we get to when we meet Hubert in the now, he's in a very he's very self-contained, and he feels like he doesn't need anybody. He's 84, and really all he needs is to talk to his daughter, who lives in Australia, and he talks to her once a week, and that's where we find him. He doesn't want people in his life, and but in the past, in the kind of then part of the story, we find that the Hubert that we meet, the young man, is completely different. He's very outgoing. He's very optimistic. His nickname by one of his best friends is Smiler. He's always looking on the bright side. And I suppose really the story of All the Lonely People is you finding out how the man that we meet at the very beginning became who he was, but at the same time also how the man we meet at the beginning becomes somebody else by the end of the book. And so it's about journeys and it's about life, really, kind of a life. I've never written a book before that carries on in such a scale that it takes you from um, the kind of early 20s of this young man all the way through to his 80s. But it never feels like you're never bored because you're kind of going between these two timelines. And it's a book that a lot of people have connected with. I feel. I think it's that thing about loneliness is such a universal kind of feeling and emotion. We've all been there, and we all know what it's like. And of course, with the pandemic, so many people who perhaps might not have thought of themselves as being lonely were suddenly, certainly in the UK, where we're having to stay home. So people who lived alone, even the young, were having to stay, and they were, they were away from their families, they were away from their friends, and so they, a lot of us sort of learned for the first time, perhaps, just what loneliness can be. So it's a very pertinent book.
I think it's extremely pertinent and happening as it does. I mean, it came out in 2020.
That's right.
So that meant you wrote it before the pandemic actually
That's right.
started,
Yes. Yeah.
right? And I think that it was a shock to a lot of people, even people who enjoy their own company,
Yeah.
when suddenly you were stuck with just your own company for months on
Yeah.
end. That you suddenly went, okay, I got to get somebody else in this here.
Yeah.
I can't be like this, and it's uncomfortable. It is
Yeah.
uncomfortable, but I think what I got from it when I read it was that thread of hope
Yeah.
that just because you're a certain way, like Hubert is in the beginning,
Yeah.
doesn't mean that's where you have to stay.
Yeah. I think where we meet Hubert, I think he is that, we learn as we go through the book why he is the way he is. But he's one of the messages of hope within it is that people, community can make a difference. And one of the again, it's interesting because I'd written it before the pandemic, but one of the interesting things that kind of come out of the pandemic was this idea of communities making a difference. So often, as kind of Hubert sort of says in the book, you don't really know your neighbours, you don't really know the people around you in a way that people used to,
Mhm.
because everybody's living such busy lives. And one of the things that kind of comes out of the book is just this idea that if you make an effort, it can make this huge difference to people's lives. And one of the things that kind of happened here in the UK during the pandemic was suddenly people got to know their neighbours, because everybody was in this situation, this unknown situation, all at once. Suddenly people were starting WhatsApp groups and looking out for their elderly neighbours and asking, does anybody need any shopping doing?
Mhm.
And that was a really positive thing to kind of come out of that time. And and it's a similar sort of thing that happens in the book, where we kind of realize that actually, I think the truth is people are waiting for community, and you don't even really have to do that much. I think lots of people are shy, and I think if you just make that small effort, and people really respond to it, and even if they don't, at least you've made that effort.
Mhm.
And sometimes it just takes a little while to kind of break people down almost, but you can get through to them, and it's we have a lot of power in community, and that's one of the themes of the book. We can make a difference.
Well, I think it's intent, you know.
Yeah.
Until the pandemic, we didn't know our neighbors and didn't want to know our neighbors
Yes.
because we
Yeah.
were perfectly fine with the
Yeah.
people we had in our lives and didn't need anybody else. And then
Yeah.
suddenly there was no one there. And so the intent was created. And I think your book makes a really good point that if you have the intention of
Yeah.
reaching out to someone or being open to someone reaching out to you,
Yeah.
that makes all the difference. Yeah.
It does. It makes a huge difference. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just a wonderful book, and I have to ask. Okay, so when I first picked up the book, the title immediately made me think of a popular Beatles song. So
Yes.
I,
Yeah.
I'm dying to ask: was that your intention when you picked the title, or
Oh
did you
yes.
even
Yes.
pick the
Yes. Yes.
title?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. No, I picked the title, and because I wanted something that kind of encapsulated the fact that it wasn't just a story about one man's loneliness. There are all sorts of different loneliness. You've got the loneliness of this particular of actually several elderly people,
Yeah.
but also you've got the loneliness of being a young single mum. You've got the loneliness of being bereaved. You've got the loneliness of being being in a relationship and that relationship ending. There are all sorts of different all sorts of different loneliness that can kind of come at all different times of life. And so I wanted it to kind of to sort of say this is not just a book about one man's loneliness. This is a book about lots of different people's loneliness.
And that's really, really well shown in the story, because we meet all these different people who are lonely for different reasons, but at the end of the day, they're all lonely. So I
That's the thing.
fell
Yeah.
in love with Hubert. I fell in
Thank
love with
you.
Ashley. I fell in love with Gus. I fell in love with Rose and David. And so I just have to ask, none of your books to this point have been serialized. They've all been standalones by themselves.
Yes, yeah.
Is there any possibility we might see a little more about Ashley's story? Can we know what happens with David, and Joyce? Oh my gosh, there's a little spark of romance possibility going on. I mean, are we going to find out more about these characters? You can't just have us fall in love with them and then say, "That's it, you're on your own, chaps."
It's a really interesting one. I am always a little bit nervous about sequels because um, I always feel like you pour your heart and your soul into a story, and I like to tell a story and feel like I've taken the readers on a journey and delivered, put the characters through the mill, but delivered them to a point of hope and brightness. And so to take them again, I'm always feel a little bit nervous just because, especially with a book like um, the All the Lonely People that's been so well received, it's like, oh, do you really want to? I'd feel I'd feel a real pressure to kind of, I suppose, make it as good. If it's not going to be as good as All the Lonely People or better, then I'd really wouldn't want to do that. I wouldn't want to sully the memory
Yep,
of those
gotcha.
characters, and so it would have to be a really good story, and it would have to be something that I felt wasn't just a cash in, but really there was more story to tell. And I do love these characters, and I do miss them, but they've got to have the right story. And so if the right story comes to me, then maybe we'll see them again.
Well, I'll just keep my fingers crossed and hope.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm just curious, who is your biggest cheerleader for your writing?
My first and foremost, it's my wife. She is the first person who reads any of my work, and she is the only person who reads a work in progress. I never my agent doesn't see it until it's finished, um, but she sees it as it's going by, and because I think she when you're writing, it's such an intense thing to do. Um, but it's quite difficult for you to see the wood for the trees, and so because she knows me so well, she can really, and she knows what it is that I'm trying to achieve. You know, she's because she's outside of it, the process. She can kind of go, "Have you thought about this?" and "Have you thought about that?" And sometimes they're quite often quite obvious solutions, but because I'm so entrenched in all of it and surrounded by it all, she can just say, "Well, why don't you just do that?" And you kind of go, "Oh, yeah, that's a great idea." And it's something that clearly I should have thought of myself, but these things happen. So she is my number one cheerleader and my first reader and my first editor, and yeah, everything.
Well, that may answer my next question, which is, I was thinking, you're a bit of, in America, the popular term is unicorn. You're a bit of a unicorn because you are a male writing what has been called on a lot of different forums chick lit.
Yeah.
So a guy who writes chick lit well is unusual. So I was going to ask, how do you know so much about the female psyche that you can write it from that perspective? And I'm guessing, what you said about your wife has to be a part of it.
Yes, yes, it certainly is a part of it. But I think key to being a writer is being interested in people. I don't think you can be a good writer and not be interested in people.
Mm.
And so I've always been interested in people. I've always been interested in how people work. And I'm always shocked. Um, when people sort of say, "Oh, you write female characters really well," and how do you get into the psyche? And I always think, well, this is my job. My job is to write about people, whether they be male or female. And so I kind of feel like if you can't write from the opposite gender, then you've got no business being a writer, really. It's important that we that you're able to do this. And if you're writing female characters and they come across as caricatures, then you're not actually a very good writer. It's a little bit like being an artist who, I'm really great at drawing faces, but I can't do noses. It's pointless. You're not a good artist. You need to be able to do all the things that you need to do. And part of being a good author, I think, a good writer, is to be able to write both male and female characters and make them believable. But the one place where I do struggle is dressing my female characters sometimes, and just because I don't know much about women's clothes, so I might say she's in a green dress or a purple dress. But if you go into more details than that, I have been known to kind of go online and look at a kind of some sort of women's clothing shop online and just go, oh right, okay, she's wearing an asymmetrical top or something, just because I don't know anything of those sorts of details. But when it comes to the psyche, when it comes to the way to think, I think that's all about observation. And if I get it wrong, my wife is almost first reader, and so she will kind of point out places where if I have got it wrong, she'll kind of give me a little bit of a pointer. So mostly it's me with a little bit of my wife and a little bit of online women's catalogs.
So, in accessorizing your characters, Google and your wife are your best friends.
That's right. Yes.
Okay, gotcha,
Yeah.
gotcha, gotcha. And what else though? I mean, as an aspiring author myself, I am always wanting to know when somebody has got it right, when you've got your characters fully formed and developed and fleshed out. What is in your writer's toolbox that you go back to again and again to help you breathe life into those characters that you're creating?
That's such an interesting question. I suppose the key thing is to spend time with them. So um, when I come up with a new idea, I don't actually write for quite a long time. I spend a long time thinking about what the actual idea is, and I'll do an outline for the entire book. And so once I've come up with the idea, okay, it's a book about loneliness, then I'll think about, okay, who's going to be my main character? And I came up with the idea of Hubert. And then I plotted everything out. So I'll do an actual outline. And in the plotting of the outline, you're thinking about, okay, I've got this character. What situations can I put them in? What can they learn? How can they grow? Where are they at the beginning? Where are they going to be at the very end? And because of that, when the first time when I actually sit down to um, write the first chapter, um, I actually know them in a way that perhaps I wouldn't have done had I just decided to just write and see where the story went.
Mm.
And so that I found has been a real help. It just means that you because when I'm thinking about the story, I'm thinking about them. I'm almost inhabiting their psyche for a little bit without doing any writing at all, and think, okay, well, this is an 84-year-old Jamaican man. Would he do this? Would he do that? What would he like doing? What wouldn't he like doing? And so, because I've done so much thinking before that process, it just means that when I get to write, I have a really good understanding of who this person is and what they want and how they see the world.
Wow. Okay, that is that is really a lot to chew on. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So, Mike Gayle, All the Lonely People. We're so glad that you spent this time with us today. And how can new fans find you now?
So I'm pretty much everywhere. I'm on Facebook. Just Google Mike Gayle. I think I'm Mike Gayle, the author, on Facebook, and I'm on Instagram, Mike Gayle, the novelist, and I'm on Twitter as well. So just Google Mike Gayle, and I'm
You're
pretty
around.
much there. I'm
We'll
around.
find you. Okay. Well, thank you for your time. And thanks to our listeners for joining us today with Authors on the Air.
Thank you.